The sun had barely crested the horizon, spilling a molten gold across the endless plains that stretched beyond the horizon, like a painting come to life. Dust swirled lazily in the morning air, catching the sunlight and painting the town of Redridge in a soft, amber glow. It was the kind of town that seemed suspended in time, where the wooden sidewalks creaked underfoot and the wind carried the scent of horses, leather, and distant sagebrush. At the heart of this small, dusty settlement, the general store, the blacksmith's forge, and the saloon were already alive with activity, the familiar rhythm of everyday life humming like a quiet song beneath the open sky. Among the townsfolk, one figure moved with purposeful grace, a stark contrast to the lethargy of early morning routines. Clara Hawthorne, the daughter of Redridge's most respected rancher, strode across the boardwalk toward the stables, her long skirts brushing against the worn planks. Her hair, the color of chestnut, was pulled back loosely, allowing a few rebellious strands to catch the morning light. Clara had grown up under the wide sky of the West, learning not only how to manage the sprawling Hawthorne ranch, but also how to ride, rope, and fend for herself. Her hands were calloused from work, her eyes sharp and discerning, reflecting both the warmth and the toughness that life on the frontier demanded. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew the value of hard work. Yet, beneath her composed exterior simmered a curiosity and restlessness that no routine could contain. The town of Redridge, though modest, was a hub of activity for the surrounding plains, a place where travelers, traders, and wanderers intersected. Its streets, lined with wooden facades and swinging saloon doors, had seen both laughter and violence in equal measure. Sheriff Nolan, a burly man with a face weathered by sun and wind, maintained a careful watch over the town, ever aware that lawlessness could appear as suddenly as a dust storm. The residents lived with a cautious respect for both the open land and the unpredictable human element it attracted, outlaws, drifters, and fortune-seekers alike. Redridge was a place of opportunity, danger, and stories waiting to unfold. It was on this morning, under the sprawling canvas of an azure sky, that the first whisper of disruption arrived. A cloud of dust rose on the horizon, too deliberate to be mere wind. It wasn't the steady clip of a rider returning from the ranch. It was erratic, swift, and purposeful. The townspeople paused in their routines, squinting into the distance. Clara instinctively felt a prickle of apprehension, a sense that something or someone was approaching that would alter the delicate balance of her orderly world. And then he appeared. Jack Callahan, the outlaw whose name traveled faster than the wind across the west, emerged from the haze. He rode with an unpolished, dangerous elegance, his dark coat flapping against the side of his horse, and a wide-brimmed hat casting a shadow over his sharp, calculating eyes. He was a man defined by motion, never still, never predictable, with a reputation that preceded him like a storm warning. Bandits and lawmen alike had stories of Jack's exploits, each tale more exaggerated than the last, yet all agreeing on one undeniable truth: he was a force to be reckoned with. As Jack rode past the town, Clara felt an inexplicable pull, a mixture of fear and intrigue. She had grown up hearing warnings about men like him, yet here he was, a living, breathing embodiment of danger and freedom, challenging everything she had been taught to respect. In that fleeting moment, beneath the wide, merciless sky, the lives of Clara Hawthorne and Jack Callahan began to orbit toward one another, setting the stage for a collision of hearts and wills that neither the law nor the plains could contain. Redridge, with its dust and sun and secrets, had never known the quiet before a storm, and it would soon discover that even the most ordinary town could become the backdrop for a story that would be whispered for generations. The calm of Redridge's morning was shattered by the distant clatter of hooves. Clara, tending to her father's horses at the edge of the corral, paused mid-stride, instinctively shading her eyes against the rising sun. The sound was not the steady, methodical rhythm of a ranch hand returning from the plains. It was urgent, chaotic, and carrying the unmistakable edge of danger. She squinted toward the horizon, where a lone rider appeared, kicking up a wall of dust that swirled and twisted with the wind. His approach was too confident to be a traveler seeking shelter, yet too hurried to be a friend. Clara's heart thumped, not with fear alone, but with that peculiar pull of curiosity, that spark. That hinted something extraordinary was approaching her quiet world. The man rode like he owned the wind itself. His horse, a sleek black stallion, strained against its own momentum, hooves hammering the ground with relentless purpose. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed his eyes, and a dark coat flapped wildly behind him. There was an air of recklessness in his posture, as if he knew the line between life and death, and joy and ruin, and had long since stopped caring which side he fell on. Jack Callahan. The name had come to Clara's ears many times through whispered warnings at the general store, rumors from traveling merchants, and tales passed between cowboys around campfires. He was an outlaw of legend, a man whose exploits were both feared and envied across the West. Some said he had robbed more stagecoaches than any posse could count. Others swore he had escaped capture with nothing but a wink and a bullet to mark the occasion. That he was here, within sight of her father's ranch, seemed impossible, and yet undeniably real. Jack's arrival was no accident. A posse of lawmen had been tracking him for days, and he was running, not from the town, but toward it, seeking cover in the narrow streets and shadowed alleys. Clara watched, mesmerized, as he wove through Redridge with precision and daring, narrowly avoiding the patrols stationed by Sheriff Nolan. The townspeople scattered at the sight, children clinging to their mothers, shopkeepers retreating behind. Countess. But Clara stood frozen, torn between fear and fascination. There was something magnetic about the outlaw, a wild energy that made him impossible to look away from. Suddenly Jack spurred his horse toward the outskirts of town, disappearing behind a line of warehouses and tumbleweeds. Clara's pulse quickened. She had always been taught to respect law and order, to stay within the safety of her father's guidance. And yet, the sight of this man, dangerous, unpredictable, alive, ignited a spark in her that she could not ignore. Against her better judgment, she felt herself drawn toward the edge of the alley where Jack had vanished, compelled by an unspoken force. Minutes later, she glimpsed him again, crouched behind a stack of crates, catching his breath but alert to every sound around him. Their eyes met briefly across the dusty alleyway, hers wide with caution and intrigue, his sharp and calculating yet softened by something almost imperceptible, a flicker of acknowledgement that he had noticed her notice. In that instant, Clara realized that the man before her was more than the sum of his legend. He was flesh and bone, and somehow, impossibly, human. By the time the posse rounded the corner, Jack was gone. Redridge returned slowly to its routine, dust settling and horses stamping nervously in their stalls. Yet the town, and Clara, would not be the same. In her mind, Jack Callahan had left an indelible mark, a question, a thrill, a promise of danger that dared her to imagine a life beyond fences and routine. That morning, Clara learned that the quiet plains could hide wildness, and that sometimes the most profound disruptions came not from storms or bandits alone, but from a single, defiant man who rode against the rules. It was the beginning of a story that neither she nor the outlaw could predict, a collision of courage and desire that would sweep them both into the uncertain, thrilling expanse of the wild. West. The sun had climbed higher, turning the streets of Redridge into a sweltering expanse of dust and heat. Clara Hawthorne tried to return to her morning routines, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the figure she had glimpsed earlier, Jack Callahan, the outlaw who seemed more legend than man. Every sound, the clatter of a horse's hoof, the creak of a wagon wheel, made her glance toward the horizon, expecting him to reappear. Her curiosity, once a faint ember, now burned with the intensity of wildfire. It was near the edge of her father's ranch, where the fencing met the sparse cover of sagebrush, that their paths crossed again. Jack had returned, not by accident but by necessity. He needed a place to hide, and his sharp instincts had led him to the Hawthorne property. Clara spotted him first, a shadow among the shrubs, crouched low, alert and wary. Her heart skipped. She knew she should raise the alarm, call her father, or simply retreat to the safety of the ranch house. Instead, an inexplicable force compelled her to move closer, her boots crunching softly over the dry soil. Jack's eyes flicked up as she approached, sharp and assessing. For a moment, the outlaw's hardened exterior seemed to fracture under her gaze. There was no fear in her expression, only caution and a quiet, fierce intelligence that intrigued him. Most townsfolk would have trembled at the sight of him, at the weight of his reputation. Clara did not. That alone was unusual, and Jack recognized it instantly. "You're far from the boardwalk," Jack said, his voice low, carrying the gravel of countless miles ridden and countless risks taken. There was a hint of amusement in the words, as if he were testing her nerve. "I could say the same," Clara replied, keeping her tone steady, though her pulse was quickening. She didn't move closer, but neither did she retreat. Her eyes traced the line of his jaw, the shadowed curve of his hat, the way his coat clung to his lean frame. She saw a man marked by danger and survival, but also someone deeply human beneath the layers of legend. Jack shifted slightly, the weight of his horse leaning against him, a subtle reminder that he was a creature of motion and risk. "You know who I am," he said. The words were not a question, but a statement, a test. Clara's lips pressed into a thin line. "I've heard stories," she admitted, though her mind danced with more than rumor. "Some people say you're a hero, some say you're a menace." Jack let out a short, humorless laugh. "Stories make men larger than life. Reality's simpler. You survive or you don't." He studied her for a long moment. "And you're no ordinary girl. Most would be trembling by now." She bristled slightly, indignation mixing with curiosity. "I've never considered fear an option," she said, her tone sharper than intended. She felt the heat of the sun and the thrill of being near someone so dangerous, and a strange exhilaration stirred in her chest. Jack's eyes softened for the briefest instant, and in that flash, Clara glimpsed the man behind the myth, a man who had known loss, risk, and solitude so deeply that danger was as natural to him as breath. "Perhaps that's why I find myself here," he said quietly, almost to himself, in front of someone who doesn't flinch. Their shared silence stretched, heavy with unspoken recognition. Two worlds, so different, had collided in that sun-baked corner of the ranch, Clara's life of duty, family, and stability, and Jack's existence of motion, chaos, and freedom. Neither could fully articulate what drew them together, only that in that moment, an unspoken understanding had passed between them, a spark of curiosity, challenge, and something far more dangerous, fascination. Before either could speak again, the sound of distant hoofbeats reminded them of reality. The posse was still searching. Jack's gaze flicked toward the horizon, calculating, tense. "I should go," he muttered, almost reluctantly. Clara's breath caught. "Will I see you again?" she asked, her voice softer now, tinged with something uncharacteristically vulnerable. Jack tipped his hat slightly, a crooked smile playing across his lips. "Depends on whether you follow your curiosity or your sense of duty." And with that, he vanished among the shrubs, leaving Clara standing in the heat and dust, her heart pounding and her thoughts racing. She knew, without a doubt, that her life and the quiet world of Redridge would never be the same again. The days following Jack Callahan's appearance in Redridge were anything but ordinary. Clara Hawthorne found herself restless, her hands twitching with unfinished chores and her mind constantly drifting toward the outlaw who had so unexpectedly entered her life. Each time she looked toward the distant hills, half expecting to see the flicker of dust from his horse's hooves. Her pulse quickened. There was danger in thinking about him. Everyone in town knew the stories. But there was also an undeniable thrill, like standing on the edge of a cliff and feeling the wind. Tug at your skirts. It was a late afternoon when she first made the decision to help him. Jack had been spotted near the abandoned corral on the outskirts of town, hiding from both the law and rival outlaws. Clara's father had strict rules about strangers, and certainly about known criminals. Yet as she crept toward the corral, a mixture of fear, excitement, and compassion guided her steps. Jack wasn't just a criminal to her. He was a man in need of help, and something deep in Clara rebelled against the notion of turning him away. The first time they truly spoke without tension was quiet, almost reverent. Jack had leaned his horse against the corral's wooden posts, brushing sweat from his forehead, his coat streaked with dust. Clara approached cautiously, holding out a small bundle of food and water. "You'll need this," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's not much, but it'll keep you going." Jack's eyes widened slightly, not in anger or suspicion, but in surprise. Few people in Redridge dared to approach him, let alone offer aid. He studied her for a moment, his lips curling into a faint, appreciative smirk. "You're brave, or foolish," he said, taking the supplies. "Maybe both." Clara blushed, but held his gaze unshaken. "Or maybe I just don't believe in leaving someone to fend for themselves," she replied. The words felt bolder than she intended, but they carried a truth she could not deny. Over the following days, their encounters became a delicate dance of secrecy and tension. Clara would leave small provisions near the edge of the corral, or the shade of a lone mesquite tree, always watching from a distance as Jack retrieved them. Sometimes she would linger long enough to exchange brief loaded glances, feeling the unspoken connection between them deepen. Every interaction carried an electric charge, a dangerous intimacy that both thrilled and terrified her. Jack, in turn, began to trust her in small ways, confiding brief fragments of his life in tones hushed and wary. He spoke of the reasons he had turned to a life on the run, a betrayal by someone he once trusted, the loss of a home and a family, the harsh justice of a world that demanded survival at any cost. Clara listened, her heart softening even as her pulse raced. For every tale of danger he shared, there was a flicker of vulnerability that few ever saw. In his words, she glimpsed not just the outlaw, but the man beneath, resourceful, wounded, and profoundly human. Yet the risk of discovery hung over every encounter like a storm cloud. Sheriff Nolan had not forgotten Jack's presence, and the townsfolk whispered of sightings and rumors that could spell danger for both of them. Clara's father had grown increasingly watchful, and each time she returned to the ranch with dirt on her boots or a hurried excuse on her lips, the tension in the household thickened. She was caught between duty and desire, family and heart, safety and the exhilarating pull of something forbidden. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the plains in blood red and gold, Clara lingered longer than usual at the edge of the corral. Jack emerged from the shadows, leaning casually against a fence post, his eyes meeting hers with a smoldering intensity that made her breath hitch. "You're taking a risk coming out here," he said, his tone soft but edged with warning. "I'm not afraid," she replied, though her voice carried a tremor she could not hide. "Not of you. Not yet." Jack's smirk was slow, almost teasing, but his eyes betrayed a spark of admiration. "Good," he murmured. "Because if you are, well, the West doesn't forgive fear lightly." In that charged moment, the bond between them tightened. A fragile, dangerous thread spun from trust, curiosity, and the unspoken promise of something more. Each encounter brought them closer, even as the world around them threatened to tear them apart. The tension built like the roar of a distant storm, and both Clara and Jack knew, unspoken but undeniable, that their lives were entwining in ways neither could control. The West had a way of testing courage, of forcing choices between duty and desire, safety and passion. Clara Hawthorne had just begun to understand the gravity of her own heart and the perilous allure of Jack Callahan. The Hawthorne Ranch, usually a sanctuary of hard work and quiet order, had become a crucible of tension. Clara's father, Thomas Hawthorne, a man as unyielding as the land he had tamed, had begun noticing subtle changes in his daughter. Her distracted glances toward the horizon, the dirt-streaked boots she could not entirely explain, the faint smile that seemed to bloom in response to no visible cause. Thomas prided himself on discipline and honor, and the thought that his only daughter might be consorting with an outlaw, Jack Callahan of all people, was intolerable. It happened one sweltering afternoon when Thomas returned unexpectedly from a supply run to town. Clara had been tending to the cattle near the northern fence line, her hat pulled low against the sun, when she heard the familiar crunch of wagon wheels approaching. She looked up to see her father's broad figure descending the dirt path, his face taut with a quiet authority that rarely bent. "Clara," he said, his voice carrying across the paddock, "we need to talk." She felt a twinge of panic but tried to keep her composure. "Yes, father?" she asked, forcing calm into her tone. Thomas's sharp gaze swept over her, noting the slight sheen of sweat on her brow, the faint dust on her sleeves, the restless energy in her posture. "I've been hearing things," he began, "about someone in Redridge, about someone dangerous, someone who doesn't belong near this ranch." His eyes narrowed. "Tell me the truth, Clara. Are you involved?" Clara's heart thumped violently. She knew the truth would spark fury, yet lying felt impossible. "Father, She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I saw him, Jack Callahan. He was near the ranch. I haven't caused trouble, I swear. You just what?" Thomas's voice rose slightly, betraying the depth of his alarm. "Are you hiding him? Helping him? Do you even understand what kind of man he is?" Clara's throat tightened. She understood perfectly. Jack Callahan was an outlaw, a man the law hunted relentlessly. Every instinct in her body screamed that helping him was reckless, dangerous, almost insane. And yet the man had shown her courage, vulnerability, and a strange sense of honor that defied his reputation. I only left him water." "And food," she admitted, the words spilling out in a rush. "I didn't mean—" Thomas's jaw clenched. The rigid set of his shoulders spoke volumes. His disappointment was profound, his fear palpable. "Clara," he said quietly, a dangerous calm beneath his words, "I've raised you to be strong, smart, and above all, safe. Associating with a man like that, it's not just reckless, it's foolish. If anyone else knew, if the sheriff found out, you could ruin not only yourself, but this family." Clara lowered her gaze, ashamed, yet unyielding. "I understand, Father, but I can't just turn him away. He's not what people think he is. He's human." Thomas's expression hardened further, a mixture of frustration, fear, and sorrow. "Human or not, he is an outlaw, and the law is not forgiving. If you continue down this path, Clara, you risk everything. Do you understand me?" "Yes," she said softly, though her heart rebelled. Inwardly, she knew she would not abandon Jack. Her curiosity, her admiration, and the growing attachment she felt were stronger than fear of her father's wrath. Yet outwardly, she bowed her head, a gesture of submission that belied her inner defiance. The days that followed were tense. Clara moved through the ranch with care, hiding her secret excursions, disguising her concern whenever Jack was spotted. Nearby, her father's vigilance intensified. He stationed ranch hands on lookout, asked pointed questions, and rarely let her out of sight without scrutiny. The walls of the ranch felt smaller, the open plains beyond both enticing and threatening, and yet, in this tension, Something inside Clara solidified. She realized that love, or at least the seed of it, was rarely without peril. Jack represented danger, freedom, and an entirely new world. Her father represented duty, safety, and the known path. Both forces pulled at her with equal strength, leaving her torn, restless, and acutely aware of the stakes. The conflict between family and desire had begun in earnest, and Clara understood that the coming days would test not only her courage, but the very choices that would define her life. One thing was certain: the quiet plains of Redridge would never again feel safe or ordinary. The sun had barely risen over the Redridge plains when the distant sound of gunfire shattered the morning calm. Clara Hawthorne, tending to the horses, near the northern pasture, froze, her heart leaping into her throat. The sharp reports echoed across the wide-open land, carrying with them the unmistakable rhythm of violence. Her instincts screamed that trouble had arrived, and that it would not wait politely for anyone to prepare. Moments later, she spotted a cloud of dust billowing near the cattle pens. Jack Callahan emerged from the haze, dismounting his horse with practiced urgency. He was not alone. Two rough-looking men, likely part of a small gang of bandits rumored to be operating in the outskirts of Redridge, were moving to round up the Hawthorne herd. Their intent was clear: rustle the cattle and escape before the law could intervene. Clara's initial shock quickly transformed into action. Years of working on the ranch had given her a precise understanding of the terrain, the cattle, and the subtleties of quick thinking under pressure. She ran toward the pens, grabbing her father's rifle, while Jack assessed the situation with a calm intensity that belied the danger. "Clara," Jack called, his voice urgent but steady. "Stay low. Keep the herd together. Don't let them." "Stampede!" Her pulse pounded, but she obeyed instinctively, her hands moving with practiced skill. The bandits were reckless, expecting an easy prize, but Clara knew the land as well as anyone. She guided the cattle through the narrow gaps between fences, using her voice and a few strategic kicks to keep the herd moving in the right direction. Jack, meanwhile, moved like a shadow through the chaos, disarming one of the bandits with deft precision and using his horse to cut off the other. For the first time, Clara saw Jack in full command of his environment, not as a fugitive or a myth, but as a man who thrived in danger, whose instincts were as sharp as the edge of a blade. She felt her heart race not just from fear, but from a thrilling admiration. Together they were a formidable pair, their actions synchronized in a way that neither had anticipated. The fight escalated, shots ringing out, the smell of gunpowder mixing with dust and sun-warmed earth. Clara ducked behind a fence post, reloading, her rifle with hands that trembled slightly but did not falter. Jack shouted instructions, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Push them toward the creek. Don't let them flank us." Clara did as he said, using her knowledge of the land to anticipate the bandits' movements. The creek, a narrow, winding line of water cutting through the pasture, would slow the rustlers and give them a tactical advantage. Slowly, methodically, the outlaws were funneled where Jack wanted them. By the time the local sheriff's posse arrived, responding to the earlier gunfire, the battle had been largely won. The bandits were cornered, the cattle safe, and Jack and Clara emerged from the smoke and dust, hearts still racing. They stood side by side for a brief moment, both breathing heavily, their eyes locking in a shared acknowledgement of what they had just accomplished. "You're braver than I imagined," Jack said, his voice low, edged with admiration. Clara's cheeks flushed. "And you're something else entirely," she replied, her words carrying a mixture of awe and something deeper, more intimate. For the first time, the barrier between them, law, legend, and danger, felt momentarily irrelevant. They had worked together seamlessly, a partnership forged in adrenaline and trust, and the thrill of it had awakened something neither had expected, a connection that went beyond fascination or curiosity. As the sheriff rounded up the bandits and secured the herd, Jack stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Not many could have done what you did today," he said. "You're not just strong, You're smart, fearless, and, well, I'm glad you're on my side." Clara's heart pounded. She realized in that instant that the bond between them had shifted. It was no longer just curiosity or secret aid. It was respect, admiration, and the dangerous stirrings of something far more compelling: trust, and perhaps the beginnings of love. The plains had tested them, pushed them to their limits, and in the process, they had discovered something neither could deny. In the vast, untamed West, amidst danger and dust and the unrelenting sun, Clara Hawthorne and Jack Callahan had found a fleeting but undeniable unity, a shared adventure that would bind their fates in ways neither could have anticipated. The evening air settled over the Hawthorne ranch like a gentle sigh, the plains stretching endlessly into a horizon painted with streaks of orange and violet. After the chaos of the cattle raid, the adrenaline that had surged through Clara and Jack had begun to ebb, leaving a quiet space that neither had anticipated. They found themselves sitting on the wooden fence overlooking the fields, the warmth of the dying sun bathing their faces in soft light. Jack's horse grazed nearby, tethered loosely to a post. But Jack himself seemed unusually still, his posture relaxed for the first time since Clara had met him. He stared out across the plains, eyes reflecting the twilight, as if the fading sun were drawing out thoughts he had long kept buried. Clara watched him, sensing that the man who had always seemed untouchable, an outlaw who defied law and legend alike, was now on the cusp of something profoundly human. Finally, Jack broke the silence. "You know," he began, his voice low and contemplative. "Most people only see the surface, the myth, the outlaw, the stories that make them afraid or excited or both." He paused, letting his words hang in the cool evening air. "They don't see why a man like me ends up this way." Clara turned toward him, her eyes soft with understanding. "Maybe they don't have to," she said gently. "But I want to, if you trust me." Jack's gaze met hers, sharp and searching, and for a moment, the weight of his reputation seemed to melt away. "I trusted someone once," he admitted quietly. "Someone I thought I could count on. Thought I could build a life with. But it ended badly. Betrayal. Loss. I thought I could survive it, but it changed me. The law, the gangs, the life on the run. It all became easier than facing the pain, and easier than trusting again." Clara's heart tightened at the raw honesty in his voice. She reached out, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face, though not breaking the distance between them. "I can't imagine the pain you've endured," she said softly. "But I see the man you are now, the one who protects, who risks himself for others. That's the man I see, Jack." For a moment, he studied her, as if weighing the truth of her words. Then, almost imperceptibly, he relaxed, leaning slightly closer. "And what about you?" he asked, curiosity threading his tone. "What dreams lie behind that steady hand and sharp mind of yours, Clara Hawthorne?" She hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. She had spent her life on the ranch, bound by duty and expectation, yet her heart harbored desires that stretched far beyond the fence lines of Redridge. "I've always dreamed of more than this land," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Traveling, seeing new places, experiencing life beyond the ranch. I've learned to work, to manage, to survive. But sometimes I wonder what it would be like to truly live, not just endure." Jack's eyes softened. "That's brave," he murmured. "Most people never admit it. Most people never dare." Clara smiled faintly, a mixture of sadness and hope in her expression. "Maybe the world outside the plains is frightening, but so is staying trapped inside expectations. And maybe meeting someone like you makes me realize the risk can be worth it." Jack's hand hovered near hers, a breath away from contact. The air between them was charged, heavy with unspoken truths and fragile desires. "Risk is the only way to feel alive," he said quietly, "and sometimes the only way to trust again." They sat in companionable silence after that, the sun slipping below the horizon, leaving the plains bathed in twilight. The moment was fragile and fleeting, yet its significance was unmistakable. Each had glimpsed the other's heart, their vulnerabilities laid bare like open wounds beneath the fading light. For Clara, the outlaw was no longer just a figure of danger and legend. He was a man capable of love, loss, and courage. For Jack, the rancher's daughter was no longer just a girl to be intrigued by. She was a confidant, a companion, a reason to believe in something beyond survival. As night descended, bringing with it the cool whisper of the plains and the first stars of evening, Clara and Jack understood that their connection had deepened irreversibly. What had begun as fascination and intrigue had transformed into something more profound: trust, intimacy, and the fragile, dangerous stirrings of love that neither could ignore. In that quiet twilight, two worlds collided, leaving them forever changed and bound together in ways that would shape the days to come. The full moon hung high over the Red Ridge Plains, casting long shadows across the open land. The night was deceptively calm, the kind of stillness that always preceded chaos. Clara Hawthorne sat on the porch of the ranch house, her hands twisting nervously in her lap, eyes flicking toward the tree line. She had been waiting, knowing that Jack Callahan's presence in the area could not remain hidden for long. The distant howl of a coyote only heightened her sense of unease. Her instincts were correct. Within the hour, the soft crunch of hooves against dry dirt announced the approach of danger. A posse of lawmen, mounted and determined, emerged from the shadows, torches glinting in the moonlight. Behind them, the unmistakable figures of rival outlaws moved with a predatory rhythm, seeking revenge for past grievances. Jack had warned her this might happen, but warnings had never dulled the sharp edge of reality. Jack appeared from the tree line, his coat flapping as he assessed the threat. "They've surrounded us," he muttered, voice low but steady. "I can hold them off for a while, but you need to stay inside." "Don't come out here." Clara's pulse raced. Fear and resolve warred within her. "I'm not leaving you," she said firmly. "Not now." Jack's eyes softened, the rare flicker of vulnerability breaking through his usual guarded demeanor. "Clara, it's too dangerous. I can't risk you getting caught in this. Promise me you'll stay back." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I promised nothing." He gave her a long, searching look before nodding reluctantly, understanding that her spirit could not be restrained. With a quick, decisive movement, Jack turned to face the approaching danger. Gun in hand, he moved like a shadow across the moonlit plain, using every bit of cover the sparse terrain offered. The lawmen shouted, rifles raised, while the rival gang attempted to flank him from the edges. Clara's heart hammered as she watched from the safety of the porch. The tension in the night was almost unbearable, each shot echoing across the plains, each shout of command or curse carrying a weight of inevitability. Jack fought with a mixture of desperation and precision, his movements honed from years of survival on the run. But he was outnumbered, and Clara knew it. The thought of losing him, of never seeing his sharp eyes and wry smile again, made her chest ache. Then, one of the outlaws slipped closer than Jack realized, a gun aimed at his side. Without thinking, Clara grabbed a lantern and a length of rope, dashing from the porch toward the corral. "Jack!" she shouted, her voice cutting through the night. Jack's head snapped toward her, and for a heartbeat, fear froze him in place. But Clara, quick and resourceful, used the rope to trip the approaching outlaw, sending him sprawling into the dust. In that instant, the tide shifted. Jack capitalized on the distraction, disarming the remaining threats with deft precision. Thut. Lawmen, recognizing the chaos and Jack's skill, hesitated. The rival outlaws, cornered and disoriented, eventually surrendered. Silence fell over the plains, broken only by the heavy breaths of those still standing. Jack approached Clara, his coat streaked with dust, his face illuminated by the lantern she held. "You shouldn't have done that," he said, his voice a mixture of awe, relief, and something deeper, something that terrified and thrilled him in equal measure. Clara met his gaze, her own heart still racing. "Neither should you," she replied softly, stepping closer. "But we made it." Jack reached out, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "We did, together." The night seemed to hold its breath around them, the danger past, but the adrenaline still lingering. In the vast, open West, where law and chaos often collided, Clara and Jack had faced their trial and survived, not just through skill and courage, but through trust, partnership, and an undeniable bond. As they stood together under the moonlight, both knew that this night had changed everything. The world of Redridge, of outlaws and lawmen, of risk and desire, had drawn them together in ways neither could have foreseen. And while the dawn would bring new challenges, it also promised something rare and precious, the possibility of love, forged in the fire of danger, resilient enough to withstand the harshest tests of the wild West. The sun rose slowly over Redridge, spilling a warm golden light across the plains and the Hawthorne Ranch. After the tumultuous night, the town seemed almost surreal in its calm, as if the land itself were holding its breath, reflecting on the events that had shaken it. Clara Hawthorne stepped onto the porch, the crisp morning air carrying the scent of dust, wild grass, and horses. Her hands were still trembling slightly, not from exhaustion, but from the intensity of the night that had changed everything. Jack Callahan stood a few feet away, leaning against the fence, his coat dusty and worn, but his eyes calm in a way that surprised Clara. The danger had passed, for now, but the repercussions of their choices remained. Jack had narrowly escaped capture, aided by his skill, quick thinking, and Clara's courage. The sheriff, aware of Jack's actions and the chaos of the previous night, had allowed the outlaw to slip into the shadows, knowing he might return, or disappear entirely. Clara approached him cautiously. "You could have been caught," she said, her voice soft, but edged with worry. "We were lucky." Jack shook his head, a faint smile touching his lips. "Luck had little to do with it," he said. "Courage, quick thinking. And having someone like you by my side, that helped more than you realize." Her cheeks warmed, but she met his gaze steadily. "I couldn't just let you face them alone." She paused, searching his eyes. He stepped closer, cutting off her words gently, yet decisively. "Clara, you risked everything, your family, your safety, your future, for me." His voice was quiet, earnest, yet carried the weight of everything he had come to feel for her. "And I can't ask you to continue down that path. Not unless it's your choice. I won't be the cause of your ruin." For a long moment, Clara considered the words. She thought of her father's warnings, the danger Jack represented, the precarious balance between law and chaos that defined the West. And yet, she felt the undeniable pull of her heart, the thrill and truth of her connection with him. "Jack," she said finally, her voice unwavering, "I choose this, not blindly, not recklessly, but because I trust you and because I can't ignore what I feel." Jack's eyes softened, a rare vulnerability surfacing. He reached out, taking her hand in his, the roughness of his fingers brushing against her skin, grounding her in the reality of the moment. "Then we face it together," he murmured. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." The morning stretched around them, a quiet promise of new beginnings. Jack would still need to move cautiously, to navigate a life constantly shadowed by pursuit, but for the first time, He saw a future where Clara was not just a fleeting connection, but a partner in both risk and hope. For Clara, the Wild West had always been a place of duty and labor, but now it was also a landscape of choice, freedom, and love forged in fire and dust. Later that day, her father approached, Thomas Hawthorne's stern face softened slightly by the events of the past night. He had observed Clara's courage, her determination, and the undeniable bond she shared with Jack. Though his protective instincts warred with his respect for her spirit, he realized that some forces, love, loyalty, and the call of the heart, could not be contained entirely by fences or rules. "You've proven yourself," he said quietly, a hint of grudging pride in his voice. "But know this, your choices carry weight. Make sure you both live wisely and carefully." Clara nodded, understanding fully. "We will, Father." As Jack prepared to ride out, leaving the ranch temporarily to avoid further pursuit, Clara stood beside him. They exchanged a lingering look, one filled with trust, love, and the unspoken promise of return. Though the West was unpredictable, harsh, and unforgiving, they had discovered something enduring, a connection that neither law, legend, nor danger could sever. And so, with the plains stretching endlessly before them and the promise of adventure and romance etched into every mile, Clara Hawthorne and Jack Callahan set forth into the horizon, bound together by courage, trust, and the first spark of a love that could withstand the wild, untamed heart of the West. Months had passed since the night that had changed everything. The Red Ridge Plains had returned to their usual rhythm, the sun rising and setting over endless grass, the cattle grazing under the watchful eyes of ranchers, and the townsfolk moving about their routines with the quiet resilience of life on the frontier. Yet beneath this surface of ordinary days, the story of Clara Hawthorne and Jack Callahan lingered like a whisper carried on the wind, a legend in the making. Clara had returned to her responsibilities at the Hawthorne Ranch, her hands steady, as ever, her mind sharper and more daring. But she no longer moved through her days as someone confined solely by duty. The memory of Jack's presence, his daring, his laughter, and his quiet moments of vulnerability infused her with a sense of possibility. She carried with her a secret spark, a knowledge that life could hold danger, excitement, and love all at once, and that she had tasted it. Jack, meanwhile, remained a shadow in the distance, moving carefully across the West. Outlaw life had not changed, nor had the threats he faced. But there was now a tether, invisible yet unbreakable, pulling him toward Red Ridge and toward the woman who had challenged him, saved him, and captured his heart. Every town he passed, every sunset he witnessed, carried a thought of her, a quiet promise that wherever the road led, they would find each other again. Their correspondence, carefully hidden from prying eyes, became a lifeline. Notes slipped under doors, messages left at distant waypoints, each word a blend of longing, strategy, and affection. They spoke of the land, of dreams, and of a future they both dared to imagine, a life that balanced freedom with love, danger with devotion. Each letter, each encounter, strengthened the bond that had begun under the harsh sun and open skies of Red Ridge, proving that trust and love could thrive even in the unlikeliest of places. The townsfolk of Red Ridge occasionally whispered about the pair, recounting tales of courage and audacity, though few knew the full truth. Clara's bravery during the cattle raid had become part of local lore, and Jack's daring exploits continued to fuel both fear and admiration. But for Clara and Jack, these stories were secondary. The real adventure lay in the quiet, unspoken connection that no one else could see, in the shared glances, the fleeting reunions, and the knowledge that their lives had been irrevocably entwined. One evening, as the sky blushed with the colors of sunset, Clara stood at the edge of the plains, her eyes scanning the horizon. The wind whispered through the tall grass, carrying with it a sense of anticipation. In the distance, a dust cloud rose. Small, deliberate, familiar. Her heart leapt. Jack was returning, riding steadily across the open land, a silhouette of freedom and promise against the dying light. Their reunion was quiet but electric. Words were few, glances spoke volumes. Hands met, fingers intertwined, and for a moment, the vastness of the West seemed to shrink, leaving only the two of them, bound together by courage, trust, and the thrill of shared danger. They knew the road ahead would still be fraught with uncertainty, that challenges would arise, and that life in the West was never truly safe. But for the first time they faced it as partners, equally matched in heart, resolve, and spirit. As night fell, stars scattered across the endless sky. Clara and Jack rode side by side, the plains stretching endlessly before them. Their story, born from chance, courage, and the spark of defiance, had become something more enduring. A legend not just of an outlaw and a rancher's daughter, but of love that refused to be confined, of hearts daring to risk everything for connection, and of the untamed West itself, forever witness to the romance of two souls who had found each other amidst dust, danger, and destiny. The horizon promised adventure, the unknown, and the endless possibility of life lived boldly and together. And in the wind, carrying the scent of sagebrush and freedom, one could almost hear the whispered echo of a story still unfolding. A story of Clara and Jack, whose love had survived the wild, untamed heart of the West, and whose journey was only just beginning.